person's privacy. And yet who's asking those questions of the other two candidates? They ask them about how many houses they own. They're asking them about, well, does the fact that one of you all lives in a state that's near Russia, does that mean that you really know about Russia? They're asking all sorts of superficial questions, but nobody's asking the hard questions, and therefore they're not getting answered. That is why it is absolutely critical for all of us here this evening, and similarly all across this great land, people who care about and understand liberty and freedom and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are out there meeting with people, talking with people, listening to people, explaining to people these issues. They're second nature to us. I mean, we as libertarians, small L, large L, doesn't matter. We understand these issues. We live it, we breathe it. I mean, libertarians among all Americans are hardwired to understand these issues and to care about them. Why? Because it's a mainstream philosophy. I mean, what is more mainstream in America than a political philosophy that actually believes in following the rule of law, that believes in personal, family, community control of education, as opposed to the federal government pulling the strings that reach all the way into not just the classroom of America, but the homes for homeschoolers. Where is the authority for the federal government to tell a person in America that they cannot obtain health insurance from a different state simply because they live in another state and that crosses state lines? I mean, folks in Washington like to use the Commerce Clause of the Constitution to expand and dramatically increase the reach of the federal government in almost everything you can think of. But where's somebody asking these other candidates, for example, why aren't you raising the Commerce Clause to free up the ability of companies to offer and the freedom of individuals to obtain health care across state lines because it might cost a lot less? Or why aren't you challenging these federal laws that require, and state laws also, by the way, that require insurance companies to include coverage that individuals have no need for and don't want and are paying for, though? You're requiring these things, but where are the challenges based on a legitimate interpretation of the Commerce Clause to limit the power of government to do what the federal government says it is doing with regard to the states to free up commerce? So we have one standard for the states and private business and another very different standard for the federal government. It can basically do whatever it wants and it goes unchallenged. Nobody's asking the questions about these things. President Bush sends a $3.1 trillion budget up to the Congress. And you got to give the guy credit for at least this. He can send a $3.1 trillion budget up to the Congress and with a straight face claim that it's a conservative budget. I mean, I can't even do that. I mean, I can't. What I mean is I would never send a $3.1 trillion budget to the Congress. Trust me on that. But I can't even talk about him doing it without smiling because it is so outrageous. That is what is conservative now, or passes for conservative. A $3.1 trillion budget because it's not a $3.12 trillion budget. That makes it conservative. But nobody's asking those tough questions. Where's the authority under our Constitution for that sort of outrageous budget? Because every one of those $3.1 trillion, every one of those $3.1 trillion bills comes from us, either directly through taxes taken from us, or indirectly through government borrowing, which reduces further the purchasing power of the money that the government deigns to leave us after it takes all of that in taxes and regulatory expenses. But these other major parties, they don't ask these questions. It's, as I guess Al Gore would say, an inconvenient problem, an inconvenient truth. The truth of the matter is, of course, there is no authority for most of what the federal government does. There is no legitimate authority for most of what the federal government spends its money on. And the only way that those questions are going to be asked, and consequently the only way that they're going to be answered, is through the Libertarian Party. That is the only mechanism that's going to result in the questions being asked and the answers being given. The two major parties will not do it. By definition, they are status quo parties. And it's utterly unreasonable to expect either the Republican or the Democrat Party, two sides of the coin of the realm, which is the status quo, to cut the ground out from under it, or of the other party, because in cutting the ground out from under the other party, reducing the power of the other party, they're reducing their own, because they're all part of the same mechanism. They're all part of the same team. And they don't want anybody else playing on their field. Why? Because we would challenge them. So what are they doing? Well, kind of interesting. Take Texas, for example. In the state of Texas, the deadline for the two major for a party to get on the ballot with its nominee for president passed on the 26th of August. Do I have that correct? I think
26th was the deadline.
Yeah,
25th?
26th.
26th, I had it right. On the 26th of August, the only party that qualified, that got its paperwork in on time, was the Libertarian Party. Bob Barr is the only nominee, is the only candidate for president in Texas. Well, but the other two parties said, well, now hold on They said, hold on a minute. You know, we see what the law says. I mean, this is like, it's like President Bush. You know, I see that the law says that I can't surveil people without a warrant, but it's for the public good.
Oh.
So we had a governor years ago. This is long before my time. I'm sure McCain knew him well. It's long before my time. His name was Gene Talmadge. He ran for and served as governor for a number of years back in the 1930s and 1940s in Georgia. And his son Herman, as we say in Georgia, Talmadge, succeeded him, served in the Senate, and as governor also. But there was one point, I think may have been in the early 1940s, but don't hold me to that, in which there was a scandal, and some federal monies, I think, were taken and misused by the governor, by Gene Talmadge, and this became public and became somewhat of an issue in a political campaign, I think, in which he was seeking re-election. And his response was not to apologize, not even to deny, and hire a bunch of lawyers to get him off the hook. He went before the people of Georgia and gave a speech and said, yes, I stole, but I stole for you. And he was cheered for it and, of course, elected. Well, that's sort of the same attitude of the present administration. They've taken a play from old Governor Gene Talmadge's playbook. You know, the administration doesn't apologize for violating the law and the Constitution. They don't even defend themselves. Their attitude is, yes, we did this, but we did it for you to make you secure. That's what passes for constitutional muster these days, is as long as they say they're doing it to make us secure, to make the American people secure, it's okay. Well, that's what we have in Washington. As Mark Halperin said many years ago, he's a writer for who writes, Rafi probably knows him. Do you follow Mark Halperin's work, Rafi?
I think he's here. I think I saw him.
I mean, very, very good. Well, there's a couple of different Mark Halperins. The one I have in mind is a writer for the. He used to write a lot for the Wall Street Journal, and he's written a number of books. He lives outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. But he wrote a piece back during the impeachment time. Not the impeachment McCain was involved with, which was the Johnson impeachment in the 1860s, but the impeachment a little bit later, the impeachment I was involved with about 10 years ago with regard to former President Clinton. And anyway, Mark Halperin wrote a little bit about that. It bothered him greatly also, the standard that we seem to be accepting in modern politics, and that is the lack of any standard at all.